There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
I am graced with the presence of one of my favorite bookish podcasters. This is Emily of the Book Cougars, and we are here to talk about our journeys as book polygamists. Hello, Emily, and welcome back.
Shawn, thank you so much for having me here to have this conversation. I feel a little naked to start without my partner in crime, Chris, here with me today. So I appreciate you inviting me to be here all by my little lonesome.
Well, I'm delighted to have you here. I mean, it's hard to get a word in edgewise with Chris around.
She's so smart.
I am a book polygamist. In other words, I am reading dozens of books at the same time, and I realized that Emily is even more of a book polygamist than I am. One day I just had a peek at your current reads, and I was shocked that you had left me in the dust. And that's why I contacted you, because I thought it would be really fun for two people that are reading umpteen books at a time to talk about what that's all about and what are the drawbacks and advantages. And so here we are. Shall we get into the statistics? You still got me beat. You're currently according to Goodreads, moments ago I just checked, you're reading 48 books. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I have been keeping my number a secret from my subscribers, but it's time to cast off the shame and come out. I'm reading 37 books. So how did you get into all this, Emily? How did this begin, this book polygamy?
Well, I mean, to be completely forthright, some of it is about cleaning your closet. And so sometimes I think I don't necessarily keep up with my current reads on Goodreads. And part of that has to do with when you put a book down, sometimes I'm not prepared to abandon it. I picked it up at the wrong time. So I want to leave it on my current read shelf, but I'm not necessarily, it's not necessarily in my stack on the nightstand, so to speak, anymore.
Okay.
And
what percentage would you, just a wild kind of estimate of what percentage of those 48 books would you put in that category?
I would say a solid half are there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I've been on Goodreads for a lot of years. So that's what I mean by cleaning your closet. Like, you don't realize, unless you really scroll through them, which books are there. You may realize it when you look around at all your shelves and all of the coffee tables, etc.
Which book? Maybe it doesn't have to be the title of the book, but are there books on there that have been on there for more than a year, more than 2 years?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, there are.
I've been on Goodreads for a long time. And I mean, I'm 54, and I think Goodreads came out I don't know when Goodreads started, in 2006,
maybe
something like that. Yeah. So I have a lot of books on there that are probably deeply back in my closet, that it would be a good practice for me. Actually, Chris and I have talked about this as a goal some years, is to actually go through our Goodreads shelves and really look at them, even our TBRs, because your TBR, I like to use that if I'm at the bookstore or I'm at the library, what's on there. If it gets too overwhelming, then it's really not useful.
Yes. And I'd like to have you come back and we can have to talk about TBRs, because that's a fascinating conversation too. So basically, if I'm understanding, there's about, 24 books. Yeah, a couple dozen of books that you're actively reading. And how did that reading habit develop?
I think a percentage of them, and I probably should have pulled up my list before I talked to you, but I would say another half of those 24 are probably cookbooks.
There's a lot of cookbooks there.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of cookbooks, and not just cooking from them, but actually reading them. I enjoy the front matter. I enjoy the head notes in a recipe. I like to read about, hints that a chef might give you on pantry items. And I don't tend to take those off of my current reads, because I don't usually finish them and put them away. They're in constant rotation for me. So I would say about half of them are probably cookbooks.
Well, this is the subsets of what's on your current reads is a fascinating discussion in and of itself. would you ever consider that you had read a cookbook and then mark it as finished?
I think so. I'm trying to think if I've recently done that with a cookbook.
I know you've talked
I
about
think,
cookbooks, I'm sure,
yeah.
on Cougars.
Yeah, there's a new one, BUDMO, that's a Ukrainian chef that I did. I think I actually did shelve that because I really read it cover to cover.
Cover to cover.
And then
Okay.
cooked. If I cook one, my goal is always to cook one recipe. I cooked 3 from that cookbook, which felt like a tremendous success. And so I think I actually did shelve that as, finished book that I read.
Well, I'm getting hungry, which is not what I was expecting to. That's wonderful. In your reading life, have you always read multiple books?
I've always had a nonfiction and a fiction going at the same time. And I think often my nonfiction is an audiobook. I have noticed recently that I am also doing that hybrid reading where I'm actually listening to the fiction book that I'm reading and sometimes reading them together, literally with the print copy in front of me and listening. I just finished a book called We Ride Upon the Sticks by Quan. And I really was stuck with that one. And when I got the audiobook, it helped me get through. So
Momentum going.
yeah. But I find that I can often actually be polygamist with fiction by having one that is an audiobook and one that's a print book. So I'm doing all manner of things with that.
I think I was a one book at a time reader until I got into bookish social media. I think even before I started my own booktube channel, but just being on Litsy and different things. And I think it started with maybe one fiction and one non.
Yeah.
And then adding an audiobook, and then realizing that I could actually have 2 audiobooks going, and plus these. And then the more I got into it, and especially once I was on BookTube, it just became, I wouldn't say ridiculous. I often use words like that are kind of self-deprecatory, and we're going to talk about what that part of it. But
Yeah.
what I discovered for myself, and I'm curious to see if you relate to this, is that I read better when I'm reading a bunch of different stuff, and my attention on each book deepens if I'm cycling through at minimum a half dozen books. I mean, I'm now reading close to 40 books, but at minimum of 6 different books in different formats, nonfiction and whatever. I'll read 10 pages and put it down and pick up the next book, and I'll cycle. If I'm only reading 6 books, I could probably cycle through each book in one day's worth of reading. That's not possible when it's this many, but
Right.
I realized when I started doing that it was imprinting the books more deeply.
Interesting. Do you think that has to do with because you're picking the book up when it's the right book at the right time?
There's
the
something
subject
about that,
matter?
and I think because I'm so young, we can all agree I'm in my early 20s, that this thing about smartphones and stuff, people's attention span is not what it was.
Yeah.
So 10
Yeah.
pages is all I want to spend with one book at a time, and then I want to
Yeah.
pick up something else, and I'll probably check my email in between. And it's the break between when I pick the book up, where I have to reorient myself and maybe page back and who is this character.
Right.
That I think it's that process that imprints the book so deeply.
Yeah. It forces you to read differently, right?
Yes, I find that I can remember books better that I've read in that way. So that is kind of how I got to be a book polygamist.
So isn't it frustrating when you read a book that has no chapters or no breaks?
No, I just go every 10 pages.
Okay, you have a hard stop at 10 pages.
I have a hard stop, but if it's a chapter, I'll read the chapter usually, but otherwise it's just every 10 pages. How about you?
Yeah, I think it depends. I can't say that I consistently do that. Like say I'm going to read 10 pages. If I'm reading a difficult for me to read book, I definitely do that. But I'm a little bit anal in the like chapter break or, area breaks that I will stick to that. I like to have a nice pretty place to leave my bookmark. Nice and clean. Now I do jump around with cookbooks. I will say I'm not, I don't read those from front to back. Yeah.
what do you think are the advantages to reading polygamously? I guess I've already given one of my main ones, which is that the books get imprinted more deeply.
Yeah. That now I'm not sure I've paid attention to that. I mean, I think that that's a really good way of saying, I pick a book up when it's the right time for me to read it, because I know, my work, what's going on with my work life. If I'm doing a lot of detailed work, like this morning, I was deep into numbers. So when I pick up a book, I want it to be something that's just like, tell me a story. Don't make me work too hard for it, So I might look at the books I'm reading and do it based on that. Sometimes because of our bookish lives, we have book and reading deadlines.
Yes.
So we must read a book that we force ourselves to read a little bit more than we would necessarily, or have open up some palate cleansers.
Or faster or up to a deadline.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I'm always doing umpteen buddy reads at the same time. And those books are the ones that get finished the fastest, like within a month, whereas books that I'm just reading by myself will take often several months.
That's interesting. I don't pay attention to how long they take me. I mean, I guess you can, I do maybe if I date them on Goodreads, which you can do.
Yes, and I don't.
I think, to be honest with you, Shawn, as we're talking, I realize some of it is I have poor self-control. So I keep picking up books.
Excellent. That's wonderful.
So you pick up a book, it's like, oh, this book sounds good. I'll start it and see how it goes, and then you realize, oh, but then there's this one. And I think as I'm getting older, time is running out. So I have more enthusiasm about starting and maybe stopping. What I'm curious to see is if I used to always finish a book. And I think as my unfinished books start to pile up as my polygamy grows, some of that might have to
your book harem, can we call it that?
That maybe I'm going to be more willing to let them stay there and not get finished.
So you're not much of a bailer?
No.
And do you know this about me? I've named myself the Empress of Bailing because I'm such a notorious bailer. So I bail frequently. A few years ago, I did create a kind of a gray area and created a separate shelf on Goodreads for books that are on hold that I wasn't ready to bail, but it wasn't the right time, or I knew that I needed to read it at a different time or in a different way, like maybe by itself. It wasn't the kind of book that could be read alongside 24 others. And so I got a folder called On Hold, but I just bail on things.
And have you always been willing to do that?
Again, I don't think I ever did it. No, I barely ever did it until I got into bookish social media. I don't think it was even in the realm of possibility. It wasn't something that I even thought was an option.
But now there's so much more temptation. That's what I mean by, I think, I have poor self-control because you see what your friends are reading on Goodreads, on social media, on BookTube, and it's hard. It's hard not to jump into all of them.
Yes, God, I can relate to that. Now, the other thing that's interesting for me is I think that the kind of book that I choose is affected by the fact that I read polygamously. So I read a lot of short story collections because they're very easy to pick up and put down.
Yes.
And I'm not much of a poetry reader, but poetry or an essay collection also would be one that would be great for palate cleansers in between books, or just, to pick up every so often. Do you find that the kinds of books you choose are connected to your polygamous lifestyle?
Yeah, I would say poetry collections for me, for sure. And I've definitely gotten into more recently the poetry collections that are not just one poet, but literally a collection of poets. So it's more interesting to me. Yeah. And then also I would say linked short story collections I really enjoy, but you do feel like you can step in and out of them a little bit. I'm trying to think if I've read, I don't think I've read an essay collection in a while. I do like them. That is a good way to feel like you're stepping in and out of something that you've finished, for whatever that means. Yeah.
Now, what about drawbacks to our crazy approach to reading? Can you think of any?
I'm a little bit of I think of myself as being very focused on efficiency of my time. And so sometimes I do think when you read too many books, you have to spend time, like you were saying, going back and saying, where am I? Who is this character? What's happening here? And I wonder if, I could be fitting in more reading and completing more books, or if I'm maybe not getting the most out of that book, like I lost something in the way that I chose to read it. The flip side of that is, I will say, when I read books too quickly, because I want to see what happens with the plot or something, I am missing a lot of the detail. So it goes both ways there, I guess.
Absolutely does. And I subscribe to the flip side on both counts, that as I was saying, that I think when in kind of reorienting myself after for 5 days or 2 weeks, that makes the book stick.
Yeah.
And even a novella, even a 50-page novella, I refuse to read it in one sitting. I'll stretch it out to at least a week, 10 pages a day or something. In fact, that's happening right now this week. Yeah, 10 pages a day with a 60-page novella. So
you clearly have better self-control than me, Shawn.
Oh, I don't think I have self-control is not a word I've ever heard anyone try to apply to me, but thank you. Maybe I'll have to consider that. There are
or maybe you're just a rule follower. Are you a rule follower? If you set that 10-page rule for yourself.
Yeah, and I think they're self-created rules, but then I do tend to kind of structure my reading around those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Usually for me, I like to have something finished. As my current reads has grown, it's ballooned to almost 40 books. One thing I've had to let go of is I always like to have something finished to talk about on my Friday reads. And so usually by Monday or Tuesday, I will assess what could I reasonably expect to finish without rushing, but just which books would I like to finish by Thursday night? And now that I'm reading so many books, there are many weeks where I'm just not in the mood to finish anything. I just want to dabble in everything or in half of what I'm reading. And so I'm trying to let go of that. That no, I don't have to have something finished every week. I'm going to be reading every week, but some weeks I'll have 8 books finished and some I'll have none.
Yeah.
And that's fine. To not put pressure on myself about that. So then I really enjoy the fact that I have 37 books I could choose from on any given day or moment.
It's the pressures of being a book personality, that you feel that pressure to have
you feel that pressure, and that's self-imposed because anytime I ever talk about it, in fact, I don't even like to talk about it on my channel because I get scolded. We're not doing this to you, you're doing it to yourself. And I said, I absolutely am doing it to myself. Yes. Nobody cares except for me. So I would say one disadvantage to reading so many books is that inevitably, but it's a small number of books, but I would say in any given year, 2, 3, or 4 books, they just fall off the edges and there's too much time and I realize I got to dust the book off and say, when did I last read this? Oh my God, 4 months ago. And it's just like, okay, I have to let that one go and bail because it's just too much time has gone by. But I basically can juggle things and it's okay. But there are casualties that books fall through the cracks.
Well, I guess that's one of the things I like about like the poetry collections and the cookbooks is you don't really feel like there's a done, so I don't have to feel badly about them remaining on my currently reading list.
Do you feel you have a problem, Emily? Is this a problem in your reading life, or is this basically a net positive?
I try to think of books as only positive in my life. I definitely do feel sometimes like this, almost like you can't breathe because I think I'm just interested in so many books. And it can feel overwhelming when you start to think deeply about like, oh, how many new books are being published each week? And then there's all the backlist books and the classics. And, I'm just in this lifetime, I'm never going to read them all, which is something that's hard to accept, So I think that I'm actually getting better at dipping into books. I've always been fascinated by booksellers or sales reps who say, I can read just a little tiny bit of a book and get what the author's trying to do here. Absolutely. And I think some of my currently reads are going to end up being those. Like, okay, I dipped into that book. I know what people are talking about. And, I'm not going to read the whole thing, and that's okay.
So this is in a way, this is like, and I'm so grateful for you for going here with me, because we're kind of getting a peek behind the curtain. I just adore the Book Cougars podcast, and I love to hear you talk about books, and you talk about books in such a deep, rich way, and then take a step back, look behind the curtain, and there's this stew of books that you're immersed in all the time, but you always have something, one or two or three books that you have deeply read and can talk about so eloquently. So I suppose I would have the same ability to a certain degree. So yeah, it's kind of this is like a little support group. We're doing great stuff.
Patting each other on the back. Yes.
Thank you.
And
That's
sometimes,
right.
Sometimes you just can't, you don't want to overwhelm your listeners either and say, I'm currently reading 12 books. Like, they don't want to hear that I'm currently reading 12 books necessarily, So it's picking the ones that you've actually made, gotten deep enough into them that you have something to say about them, or just that you think would be interesting to a bigger segment of the population.
Well, I think we have reached the conclusion that we should not fool around or tamper with a good thing. So let's just not ever change.
To me. Although I do think, being open to change is always good, Shawn. So if someone had a suggestion for us of how we should handle our, overwhelming desire to be reading so many books, I'm open, but I will probably always have a lot going at the same time.
Absolutely. And it is good to be open. You are absolutely right. Just before I let you go, can you pick one from among your 48 current reads and tell us about it? It's just a very quick little check-in.
Sure. I actually have two that I brought there, but it's the same editor on these poetry collections.
Those are beautiful covers.
Aren't they beautiful? I love the covers. It's hard to tell, of course, online, but they have this really soft paper. The size of them is a little small. You can hold them in your hand really nicely. And I first discovered these, I was visiting my son in Carbondale and in Colorado, and there's a really beautiful little bookstore there. And I walked in and saw this on the shelf, and it just drew me right away. And it's edited by James Cruz, who's also a poet. And this one is called How to Love the World, Poems of Gratitude and Hope. And then this one is called A Path to Kindness, Poems of Connection and Joy. And I've really found it, also edited by James Cruz. And I should say this one has a foreword by Ross Gay, and then this one has a foreword by Danusha Laméris. Both are poets that I adore. And you can see I've got it, like little tabs in here. This one just came out, and I just pick them up. Sometimes it's when I have finished one of my, piles of unfinished books. When I finish one and I just want a little palate cleanser, I'll pick up a poem to read. Sometimes when I'm about to go to bed and I want to read because it helps me fall asleep, but I don't necessarily want to get immersed in a story. These are great for that. Highly recommend. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Emily, thank you so much for this meeting of the Polygamist Support Group. Shall we meet again next year and see how we're doing?
Yes. We should check back. I do have to ask, do you ever clean your list up, or do you just let it stay the way it is?
I thought you were going to say, do you ever clean your room?
Shawn, have you cleaned your shelves lately?
No, I don't do any of that. That's a good question. No, mine is always up to date.
Yeah. You have inspired me to go and make sure that my shelves are clean. Thank you. Part of the support group.
My TBR, that's a whole other story, but that's a topic for another video.
Yes.
I would talk about the new releases of the telephone book with you, Emily, and it would be really fun. So
thank you, Shawn. You're so sweet.
Thank you. And please come back someday.